we also have a form of demarcation, which makes it very difficult to sort of access that. And also, what we do for large customers is we've got what we call a point-to-point connection, which means that it's a secure connection between the premises of the customer and the cloud platform, which cannot be breached or broken into. So that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives you that additional security that if you're not, that gives cloud computing is worth about $200 to $500 million a year. And 90% of that is actually spent outside Nigeria. That's the biggest challenge we have. So if you look at it, NITDA, at the time, the Minister of Communication used to be the DG of NITDA. And under his leadership, they created what they call the NCCP, which is the Nigerian Cloud Computing Policy.
Okay.
But it's not enforced. And also, I mean, my criticism of that policy is that it doesn't address the core issue. And the core issue is data localization. And what I mean by that is that their focus was the governmental, the MDAs using the cloud.
Using the cloud.
That was their focus. And I'm saying, wait a minute. If you look at it, if you take the industries that are regulated by or affiliated to the Nigerian authorities, so you've got CBN, you've got NICOM, you've got PENCOM, you've got NNPC. So anybody that is related to that should be under those laws and jurisdiction because it relates
they share
to
data one way or the other.
It relates to Nigeria's economic success.
True.
So when you look at it, and if you say, let's say $500 million is being sent out of the country rather than being spent within the country.
Within the country. That's big.
Because if you're on CloudFlex, you're paying in Naira. If you're on AWS, you're paying in dollars. So that's precious resources that is going out, which could be avoided.
Wow.
So that's the core and the biggest issue. So for me, I mean, it's great that you have the DG of NITDA who has a great understanding now as a minister of communication. So greater powers, a wider responsibility. And I know that there's a lot that they're trying to do because from the ground up, there are many issues with right of way, issues of connectivity, issues of improving the things we have. So there's quite a lot to do. And cloud computing is just one aspect of it, and it's interwoven. That as you succeed with these things, you will then succeed with the other things. But I believe that what is really needed is the enforcement of the Nigerian cloud computing policy, extend it into the regulated industries, which covers the banks, all the financial institutions and all that they must be in Nigeria, not outside Nigeria. And I think that would be a boom for Nigerian businesses. It's not a selfish strategy. So I'm not saying it just because I'm in that arena. Because if you look at it, how many cloud platforms do we have in Nigeria? We have less than 5. You take South Africa, they're over 150. So my expectation is that there will be more and more cloud platforms. And I believe that if there's an upsurge of business, then, of course, it's going to birth more companies. Birthing more companies mean that it's a greater boon for our economy. And it's a contribution into the economy of the country. So that's the greatest thing. The second thing is I believe that there's a need for more training, more awareness, because you find that people don't understand and we don't have adequate training in there. The third thing is there's a need for collaboration. We're so used to working in silos, and silos is not going to create growth. We need to collaborate because the nature of it is that one person can't do it all.
No.
And for me, it was really telling. And as I sort of watch what happens in the world, and I say to myself, large companies who can afford to build their own data center, own their own cloud platform, will rather be on a public platform. So you realize that it's more the fact of let the experts do what the experts do. Let's focus on our core business. So in saying that, Netflix in the cloud, Zoom in the cloud. they don't have their own infrastructure. So when you look at all the large companies, and that's why when the pandemic happened and there was a growth in use of Zoom, a growth in use of Netflix, it meant that the cloud platform grew and they had to give more space and more resources to these businesses so that they could have a bigger platform to run.
Fantastic. Now, sir, still picking on something you mentioned while discussing the issue of awareness. I mean, before we started this morning's discussion, I was chatting with you earlier, and I told you that someone else I was talking to recently raised this same issue, that why don't we have enough awareness and enlightenment as regards to cloud computing and its advantages? Do you think, how important do you think proper awareness, both from the part of the government and from the private players like yourself, would play towards getting, as it were, the gospel on cloud computing out to the general public?
I think it's really, really important, because what you don't understand, you cannot appreciate. Of course. Like I said, I made the statement that everybody
needs it,
uses the cloud. Yeah. If you have a mobile phone, you are connected to the cloud in one way or other. So it's just to create that awareness, create the training, so that we can benefit from it and we can understand and make our choices, the decisions with the individuals, with the companies and all that. But if they're not aware of the choices, I get this every day where people say, oh, I didn't know about your company. Oh, I didn't know we had this in Nigeria. We have an extremely large cloud platform. We have the capacity to take on, a lot of business in there and to give great service as we do. I mean, to give you an example, in this pandemic, we onboarded a large customer in February, and it was such a natural move for them, because when the lockdown happened, they just continued business uninterrupted, because the way we are set up, and even my office, we closed our physical office and we were working remotely, and to date we're still working remotely without any loss to our business, and we were even more efficient, and we could have more meetings. We could do a lot more in there. And so that's a great advantage there. And that's what we've had to benefit from. And I believe that companies that were not in the cloud, it was a struggle for them to keep the lights on, as to say, simply because they had to get physical people to physical locations to get things done. You've got to feed the generator to make sure that whenever there's a power cut, you keep your data center going in your office and things like that. But if you were in the cloud, you would not have had that problem. That, all those peripheral things. I mean, like you said, like we were talking about, today in the 21st century and going ahead, companies have no business worrying about batteries, worrying about power, worrying about, the router, worrying about the capacity of these things. Their focus should be their business, because business is getting more and more competitive. There's a lot to do. So even technology has to align more closely with the business, rather than worrying about the traditional thing was that there were demarcations. You worried about infrastructure, and infrastructure was common to all, and you spent a lot of time with that commonality, which today should not be your business. And that's what a lot of businesses have recognized in America, to say, listen, that's not going to add any value to us. Let somebody else worry about that, and let's spend our resources on our people on what is our core business, so that we can then be far more competitive and we can get the advantage of that. And the key thing in saying that, there's no loss in terms of, it doesn't make your team redundant. Your IT guys have a lot to do. So, and even those who are more infrastructural focused, all they have to do is reskill. To do things that are more business focused rather than infrastructure based.
Well said. Now, still on the issue, some of the issues facing Nigeria. I recently read an article online that says, despite Nigeria being the largest economy in Africa, the possibility of the country being the next battleground for cloud services is still quite low. While there are a few local players making good effort, such hindrance like epileptic power supply means data centers would have to run on alternate energy sources. Now, a lot of discussions have hindered on energy, power. how true is this as we talk about the business of cloud services?
It's not true. Not true in terms of the fact that data centers don't necessarily depend on the grid power.
Okay.
So data centers do not have the same issues as the country has. Reason for that is that there's an economy of scale.
Okay.
Because a data center is dealing with a lot of people. So a data center is dealing with, let's say, 10,000 people. So what they're doing is that they're creating power for that 10,000. So because they're creating power for the 10,000, it's affordable for them. They can deliver power at an affordable price for that.
Okay.
So when you look at data centers have a minimum of 4 generators, and some data centers are not on the grid. So you have there's a tiering system, and the tiering system talks about the allowable time. So, for example, if you're a tier 3 data center, you've got to be up and running for 99.9984%, which means that you're only allowed about 8 minutes of downtime a year. Now, the data center like that you have in Nigeria, they haven't had a downtime in 6 years. So they've been able to deliver power, deliver all power, cooling, and networking for 6 years uninterrupted. So let's give credit where there's credit. In Nigeria, we've got world-class data centers. We have a minimum of 4 world-class data centers, if not more, and there are more coming online. So we have the facility locally. They're as good as anywhere else in the world. On top of that, we've got the cloud services and different cloud companies sitting in these data centers providing the service. So all these things that are needed are there. And because of the scale and because of the economy of scale, it's not a worry. Yes, power is 25% of the cost of a data center. But because of the amount, the cost of the data center and the cost of what they've put in there, they can afford to build power. One of the new data centers coming online, they're using gas, grid, and generator in there. So they have multiple sources of power, and they have the redundancy, and they are a tier 4 data center, which means that they even have a higher degree. I think it's 4 nines in terms of 99.49 of uptime that they're deriving in there. And all this that we're talking about, they're certified by international companies. So they're not certified locally. So which means that the standards and that they're meeting is to international standards, which means that they're as good as any data center in the world.
That's really fantastic to hear. That's really fantastic to hear. Now, so we're fast coming to the home stretch for our discussion today, but I still need to throw this question in. Earlier, you talked a bit about the outbreak of COVID, and which would bring me to this question: what effects did the outbreak of COVID-19 have on cloud computing in Nigeria? Ordinarily, many would have expected some kind of a boom. But from your own perspective and experience, what has the effect been since the outbreak of COVID-19, generally, on cloud computing in Nigeria?
In Nigeria is out of step with the world. In the world, I think what you had that I think some of the cloud companies in Europe ran out of space at the outset of the COVID. I mean, at the end of the first quarter of the year. We didn't run out of space in Nigeria because we didn't have that adoption as they had, and again that awareness. And I think maybe we're just used to the struggle. So rather than looking for the easy way out, we'll rather struggle and have the inefficiencies of downtime, of people struggling to go and get the data center up and running and spending more money than we should. But if you look at it, the pandemic has changed the face of business forever, irrespective of what happens. And I think that cloud computing has a great role to play, and still has a great role to play in terms of making life easier and making businesses far more efficient. So it's it's something that we need to do. We need to move to the cloud so that we can derive the cost saves, because there's a huge drop in revenue. There's going to be a huge squeeze on expenditure. And there are 2 ways you save money. You either save money by cutting services, or you save money by alternative ways of providing those services and even increasing services. And the irony of it is that with cloud computing, you will cut costs. At the same time, you will increase the services you're giving, and you'll be more competitive to be able to try and claw back some of that revenue that you've lost due to the effects of the pandemic this year.